All right. So what we'll discuss as we run through this is the general execution of a proposal, and of course that's going to widely vary. It depends upon what industry you're in, and but really more or less talking about how the estimate and the estimating department plays a role in that estimating process. Um, Talk about some typical processes and potential contract type topics and discuss some practices for field site walk um, and client meetings. And the reason I'm bringing these into I know this is an estimating class, and so you're maybe wondering why these particular topics. And that's in most of the cases, estimating is in the middle of this. And as future managers or current managers, you're overseeing this general process and also trying to make sure estimating's participating or receiving the information. So estimating's right in the middle of all this. At least it has been in the cases that I've been involved in. Again, I've got more of an industrial background, and I know we have a number of people here that are focused on building construction, residential, or infrastructure. I think infrastructure is going to be somewhat similar. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure on the building construction, commercial, and residential side. The amount of commercial that I have been involved in, we weren't quite this involved in the bidding cycle. Most what I did at that time was actually negotiated, and I know that the building construction, it's more or less you submit your bid and they'll have an opening and there's decisions made right there. While industrial really tends to be more interactive as the process moves along. Generally, high level, the tendering process from a client perspective is issuing an invitation, receiving, interacting with those responses, and then making an award. And that's a very simplistic statement because it takes them a while to get that package put together, and the volume or the complexity of that package also depends upon what FEL stage that they're in. So if it's an FEL one and they're reaching out for the first time, it's going to be very high level, very conceptual, and they're really looking to bring in some engineers and other support people to help them try to get the process started as they move into FEL 2 and FEL 3 stages. But as they move through each one of those phases and they break through the gates to the next FEL stage, and the associated estimate, as we've talked about before, becomes more and more detailed, and the accuracy requirement is increasing. So the package they're sending out has to increase. And really, by the time we get to FEL 2 and FEL 3, they're the ones that are approving the invitation issuing, but really it's the engineering company that's formally sending out the information. Depends on how they've structured their contract as to whether or not they're issuing it with information they've received from the engineering company, or whether or not the engineering company is issuing it and they're just overseeing it and facilitating that invitation. But then it's going to be some blended response as far as they receive RFIs on the details of how they respond. And is it the engineering company that's responding, or is it the client owner that's going to be responding, and maybe a blend of the two? Where this becomes kind of a gray area is that if you're a preferred bidder, let's say for Dow or ExxonMobil, and you're on their small capital projects list, which means that most everything is under 10 to 30 million dollars. They all have different criteria. Then the client itself, their engineering firm usually is the one that's driving it, but they may be bringing in another contractor to facilitate that effort, but their own engineering does a lot of that work. Meanwhile, when you get to the 100 million, 200 million, multi-billion dollar projects, I can pretty much guarantee you it's going to be a third party contractor, a Fluor or Bechtel or Kiewit, someone of that level that's going to be engineering the whole plant or the unit or multiple units, whatever the scope is. And the client's just going to be overseeing it and driving what they're doing indirectly. So there's a, it's going to vary based upon size and complexity of who's actually pushing an invitation and responding to the RFIs that the contractors are sending back. And then the award, even on some of the $5 million jobs that I've been involved in, it takes weeks for them to make a selection as they go through and they analyze the qualifications as well as the price and the schedule and the execution plans that you've written up. I've seen large jobs take well over a month. I've even had some small jobs take several weeks to over a month, which sometimes is surprising when you're thinking, took them 5 weeks to make a decision on a $5 billion job, and here this $9 million job's taking 5 weeks also. But as the money shrinks, the scrutiny does as well, and the criticality about in a $5 billion job, no one's worried about $100 million line item in the basis. It's in the estimate. It's a small item. There's contingencies that are much greater than that. $100,000 in a $5 million job gets a lot of attention. Everybody wants to know why it's there. What's it stand for? And if you're submitting that kind of detail. On the other hand, the contractor, they're receiving this invitation to bid. They need to vet the package, make a decision, and then I'm making a simple statement here of they go forth and assemble the proposal. But as we all know, it's much more difficult than that. It's a simplified statement where they're doing quantities, they're developing execution plan, they're pulling together pricing, pulling together laboring, and analyzing whether or not they're too aggressive or too conservative in their estimate before they finally put on their markups and submit it. But the main point here is that one of the primary reasons that companies put estimates together, construction companies, is because they're bidding on a tendering process. The statement of one of the primary reasons, I'm leaving kind of an opening there, is because there are a lot of jobs that we've bid in the past that we weren't actually competing for the job. We already had the job. Maybe it was a cost reimbursable job. And so we were required to assemble an estimate to present to them what we thought the project was going to cost, but we weren't in a competitive situation where we were going to lose it if we were too high or too low. We were in a position of, we put forth our best effort to tell them what we think, and it's pretty much open book, and then everybody gets a chance to beat on it. The client, our own management, and we all work through what we think the best number is at the end of the day. And everybody has their own reasons for why they want to push it up or push it down, squeeze it or loosen it up. And then there's other times when we've worked on check estimates, which we mentioned last week, because the project's already moving forward, but things have somewhat, they seem like they know they've derailed, or it seems like they have derailed. And everybody now wants to recalibrate the baseline that they are managing the job by. And in that case, they'll call in the estimating department and they'll re-estimate the project, but they'll include expended costs to date, including those that are committed. And then they'll actually estimate what's left, what's for the forward-looking prices, and then create a new baseline. Those two situations aren't really responding to a competitive tendering process, which therefore that's why I'm saying it's one of the primary reasons is this is the majority of the time is responding to this tendering process. So some key points: as soon as the project is received, the invite is received, as soon as possible, you want to run through a bid no bid determination. A lot of the times, it's an automatic bid decision as soon as we receive it, and we're going to do a study or an overview of the project to see if we need to make a no bid. Uh, Very rarely have I been in a situation where we really received an invite and we didn't know what position we were going to take right off, initially once it comes in. It's always yes until proven no, in the circumstances I've been in. I don't know, does anybody else in the class right now work in a situation to where when you receive it, it's really a 50-50 chance of going either direction?
Are you talking about the bid or?
The response to the bid. So in other words, whenever we've received, when I think of all the companies I've been with, where there was Brown and Root, Fluor, Dane Zimmerman, Cajun, Black and Veatch, when we receive an invite to bid, it's the underlying initial decision is yes, we're going to bid everything that comes through that door until there's a reason why we think we shouldn't. I've never been in a circumstance where really when it comes in, everybody's saying, well, we're not sure, we'll have to think about it. And it's really almost a 50-50 decision. It's really from the start, it's about an 80 to 90% yes, but we'll check and see if there's a reason why we should reconsider.
Well, is that before you go through the Seasonese with the company, before you bid?
Yes. Yeah, because that's part of the bid, no bid determination
Right.
going
So
forward.
it's an automatic yes, we're gonna bid, and then you go through the C&E process, and then you can either no bid or technically incomplete or whatever.
Yes, that tends to be if I understand what you're seeing, uh,
Clarifications and exceptions.
okay. Um,
Like, you can't meet a technical proposal that we put out there. So for stainless steel, you can offer carbon steel, or, just clarifications and exceptions to what we put out there. And then we say yes or no or whatever.
yeah, I think, well, I'm going to jump into a bid, no bid template that I helped build for Cajun, and it'll maybe present some of the ideas that I'm trying to touch on here. When it's first received, we're really saying, all right, we got another opportunity. We're ready to chase it, but you still have to go through that bid no bid and make that final decision, because once that final decision has been made, usually the client's looking for some form of recognition or acknowledgement, whether it's a letter, whether it's an email, whether it's checking a box inside of a system that they've set up. I know, some of the small cap work where they have a select number of bidders that are always, the same 5 or 6 are always competing for the work. They'll have an online system that you are submitting to and receiving from, and you can click boxes in there and say, yes, we're going to bid, or no, we're not going to bid. So I've worked in that environment before, but we also, on the outside of that, where it was not as structured, we would write a letter basically saying, yes, we intend to bid. Uh, so it's an intent to bid letter, uh, which is different from the intent to contract letter that they may be requesting with the proposal package. I've always seen the client desiring some form of commitment as you go forward. Some cases, until you committed to bid it, they wouldn't even send you the full package. They would send you just a part of the package. So, for example, when we receive a full bid package, we're expecting to see a written scope of work, or in some cases, they call it scope of facilities, a set of drawings, and again, depending upon what FEL level we're at, if we're in FEL 2, then we're going to be doing well to have process flow diagrams or block diagrams and a conceptualized plot plan. That's about all that will exist at FEL 2. At FEL 3, Now we're expecting um, a more finalized plot plan, maybe some conceptual elevations. We should have P&IDs in addition to the PFDs, and maybe some more focused um, equipment arrangements. But still, we don't. There are no isometrics. There are no concrete plans. There's no elevation plans on the pipe rack or exterior structures, open structures at that point, because that will all be developed during FEL4 in detailed design. The lists are growing in number and growing in completeness, where in FEL2 you have a very conceptual equipment list, and that's pretty much it. By the end of FEL3, you'll have a very refined equipment list. Some of the items are already potentially being purchased, the long lead items. The others are they're planned, but they have the trigger hasn't been pulled yet because there's not 100%. It's not 100% that the project's going to go forward. Usually in the FEL at the end of FEL3, it's got to go through the gate to get to FEL4 before it's really going to happen. But then you have instrument lists, pipeline lists, not pipeline lists, but pipeline lists, HSE lists, and other specialty item lists for piping. So the lists become quite extensive in the FEL3 compared to 2. Specifications are now being determined. You're so conceptual in FEL2, you're not going to rely on specs too heavily. FEL3, you now know what it is you're dealing with, so you can start using all your standard specifications as part of the work. So we're going to expect to see that in the package as well. And then, as you were referring, the terms and conditions that would come with the contract and the contract itself. I'll be honest, every package that I've seen received did not necessarily have a simple contract in it, but the vast majority did. And I think that's highly important, because you really need to know what it is they want you to sign. If you how can you really commit to a project if you don't know what the contract terms are going to be? If maybe they're spelling them out, they're trying to spell everything out in the terms and conditions, and the contract itself is very simple, generic. Maybe that would be a reason to hold it back. But usually there's a blend of the two, and then your general conditions. So we're usually looking for all of that to comprise a complete bid package. And we want to, if we have the opportunity, to peruse through all of that prior to making a bid, no bid decision. If we have the opportunity, we really would like to make the site visit before we make a bid, no bid decision. Again, this is thanks to Cajun Industries, but this is a template that we had built to make these decisions by. And as I was stating before, whenever the invite arrives, pretty much there's no question we're going to bid it unless something pops up that says, wait a minute, we need to reconsider. And sometimes we didn't even stop. We just said, we're doing it and we're moving forward. But we normally, particularly on the larger jobs, the ones that inherently seem to have more risk involved, we then would fill out this document and sit down and have a general meeting of everyone that has any voting in the opportunity, and talk through what we thought they were. So we had, there's generic items here of who is it, what's the project name, what date, what's the value, what's the contract type, and then we would write in some of the key details of what the project was supposed to be, supposed to contain here. Early on, we would try to make, as soon as it came through, we'd try to do an assessment within hours of, do we feel like this is going to be a go or no go for us? And of course, normally, like I said, it was a go unless something else showed up. But this was an opportunity to make a very quick decision here. And then we'd walk through. We were asking questions such as, are we obligated to bid in any way? Have we signed something or made an agreement that says we're obligated? If the answer is yes, well, then we pretty much now have to bid no matter what. Most cases, it was no. But we were asking, does it align with execution strategies of the company? Is the project size complexity something that fits our target capabilities? You know, for Cajun, 5 million to 30 million was what really won the 30 million was a pretty sweet spot for our group at the time. For Black and Veatch, right now, a sweet spot for us is pretty much 50 to 500 million. When I was at Fluor, our sweet spot was like 1 to 5 billion. So, that the answer to that question really varies based upon your company, what your company focuses on. So it may seem like a fairly straightforward question, but the answer can vary quite a bit. So as we walked through, we were looking at, are the terms and conditions acceptable? Sometimes, and I'd be curious to know how y'all see it or have experienced it, but we'll walk into a project and we'll look at the competition and we'll feel very good that we can compete with everybody here and probably compete well, successfully. But there's always one or two we're going, oh, this job here is bent in this direction. There's a lot of pipe here, and that particular company is really good at bidding the documents and then change ordering. And so we don't know if we're going to compete with them very well or not. So that would end up impacting our decision, particularly if we had a full house. If we were stretching ourselves to bid more and then execute because our resources were pretty much at full utilization, a situation like that might lead us to no bid. Even though we'd like to have the job and go out and have to hire some new people to expand our resource base to take care of it, doing something like that whenever you're in a very competitive situation could take you in the other direction. Any thoughts on these kind of topics, these key topics? Have y'all had any similar experiences or?
Well, I mean, it's always what is the selection process, and I know when we evaluate these things, we look at it. Did we do our homework up front? Do we have some kind of these relationships up front? Have we done our homework up front? And then how's the eventual winner going to be selected? Because some of these can cost millions of dollars just to put together. So if we haven't done our homework and we haven't done anything up front, we got to take all that under consideration and see if it's something that we want to pursue.
Now, in this case here at Cajun, we were a pretty lean, mean organization. Our entire estimating team was around 5 or 6 people, and we were pushing out, an estimate every week, every other week, sometimes more, depends on how big they were. The smaller ones, $1 million or so, that you can push those out pretty quickly. The ones that are larger take a lot more time because we were actually having to hand take off the steel, hand take off the isometrics, and so it was a labor intensive, but we were running lean.
So what's the selection process in these cases? Is it low bid with exceptions?
Well, the clients like to say that it was best value, which means it's not necessarily the low bidder, but we knew that in most cases it was pretty much a low bidder. There were exceptions where, we won a lot of the jobs as either low bidder or number 2. And the number 2 is where the exception comes in. There were times where the client felt that the low bidder actually wasn't capable of handling the job well. And so we were second and we won. There were other times where we won because they thought we could handle the job and we were the low bidder.
So it is the evaluation, do they normalize the different bids? Do they have some kind of equation where they normalize them?
Yes.
Based on your exemptions, based on your exceptions?
They will. And there are times where we've actually lost bids for that reason. That's where the the lumps, and this is all lump sum, by the way. We at this time we were bidding very little cost reimbursable work, but the whole concept is bid the drawings, don't bid anything else. But as soon as you wrote a qualification saying this has been excluded, or that's been excluded, then that triggered them to say, well, then we think that's worth this much, and they would add it to your bid. So there was actually a couple of bids. One that I remember in particular, it was, it wasn't that large of a job. It was, I think it was under $2 million or right around $2 million. It's a pretty small job, but it was all pipe. We had to upgrade a pipe rack and run a couple of lines, but there was, 10,000, 15,000 feet of pipe. And we actually, my understanding was, is we submitted the low bid because we came up with some opportunities that we thought could help us become more efficient in handling the pipe, getting the pipe installed. It was a lot of side load type work, but you couldn't weld because it was an operating plant. So it had to be flanged in some manner. But we had a few key exceptions that we noted. And when they took those exceptions, they added their value for what they thought that would cost, and it pushed us over into third place somehow, and however they determined things. And there was one other that came in that was, I think the second bidder basically said, we don't have any exceptions, we'll just do it for this price. So that was a pretty risky statement, but that's the position they took. And so they were literally about to cut us a limited notice to proceed, and they halted, and a week later they told us we lost the bid. So somebody was in communication with the number two bidder, and they plussed up our number enough, and the other bidder promised enough that they changed their minds, and we ended up losing that bid. There's been other bids where we were in strong negotiation with the client. The client liked us. The client knew we could do the work. We were the second bidder, but the low bidder, we kept warning them, this company is very good at bidding the drawings, not writing exclusions, because their position is, if it's not on the drawing, there's no reason to write an exclusion and let them know it's not in there. It's their drawings that are deficient. They'll find out when you bid them, when you change order them. And this company's very good at it. And so we kept telling them, the final number that you pay these people is going to be X percentage higher than what we're telling you, because we're telling you what we think the number is going to be, and we're letting you know what's excluded. The problem was they were so much lower that the management of that company, because there's the group of people that are making the decision, the project team, and then there's upper management that they have to answer to. Upper management saw the numbers and said, you've got to go with the low bidder. There's too much money on the table. They brought the low bidder in, and we kind of heard all this secondhand, right? Because we're not in the meetings with the client and the other bidder, but their person was being very open with us because he felt like we were the best value bid, even though we weren't the lowest. The other company said, "Oh, I don't know how they worded it. They basically said, no, we won't change order you." They selected them, gave them the award, and then we found out that before they even started, they submitted 3 change orders. So I can't believe that they flat out lied. I don't think they would go there, but they obviously stated something in a way that the owner's management, that's what they heard. So I'm not sure how they worded it, don't know exactly what they said, but whatever they said, that's what the management heard. So once they won the award, they started submitting change orders. And of course, at that point, when the client goes, well, you can't do that. And they're like, well, look at your drawings. We bid the drawings, the information, the money that we have not included is due to the inefficiencies in your documentation. not ours. And so they were winning the change orders, and ended up just like we told them, that it was ended up higher than what we would have bid, what we would have cost. But the end of the story, the moral of the story there is that a lot of the companies do try to go best value, but they can't get past the visual a lot of times, and they end up going low bid. And where we were really working and trying to understand where that opportunity is that if you're not as good at change ordering as your competitor, and your competitor is bidding very, very low, and they're going to change order themselves back into profitability because there's no way they're going to make money at the bid that they submitted. You have to, as a company, you have to be real honest with yourself and say, well, are we going to bid lower than them anyway and try to win it, and then try to change order ourselves back into profitability when we typically aren't that good at it? We were fighting that a lot because we just weren't as good at that. We were better at building a relationship and saying, this is what we think the job's going to cost you at the end of the day. And in fact, most of the companies I've worked for have more of that mentality of, we think it's going to be $100 million at the end of the day, not 120 or 98. And so we want to we want to cut a contract with you. But there are other companies out there that are very good at playing that lump sum bid the documents game. And in some cases it may seem a little underhanded, but that's how you win. And so I don't blame them for it. They're just very good at it. What that means is they really understand the documents. They understand what they're looking at. And it's not, in this case, it's not just an estimating process. It's an estimating process that rolls over into a project controls process. And when I say project controls, I have to qualify my statement in that in most industrial companies, project controls is a department. It's not a function. I know in building construction in the commercial world, project controls is more of a function and less of a department. The superintendents on site or the project managers running the job, they are performing project controls on that project. In the industrial side, we actually have a project controls department that consists of cost specialists and schedulers, and and these days, most of the time, estimating is under that umbrella also. And so the other two departments, when the estimating hands over the estimate, they convert it into the budget and they start tracking it and facilitating those efforts underneath construction management and project management. And if your processes and your people aren't trained to know the documents very well and saying there's a hole, and now let's leave the cost out when we bid it, and then let's know that's there, and let's manage a change order to cover that cost, then you'll never get the money back. And another thing that we dealt with regularly is that when we wrote, as an estimating department, we were writing qualifications saying that's not in there, hoping that it would get pulled into either by reference or directly pulled into the contract, so we could write a change order against that. And what I found is that most of the time in the negotiation process, after I was out of that, as it proceeded and I was no longer in it, those qualifications were moved to the side. They got removed from the table, but yet the money that needed to go in the estimate to cover them was never added, and that becomes a problem. It's the same problem as before. Do you try to compete with somebody that's good at bidding the documents and change ordering themselves out? we were trying to approach it a different way. It's a little more open book method, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't get caught, but it would get removed anyway. And so in those cases, we'd have to find a way to do something else cheaper to make up for that money that we weren't going to be compensated, because we had no way to change order now at that point. So any other thoughts about what to look for, the no bid process? So as we would go through, we were looking at comparing capabilities, comparing locations, job size, complexity, trying to assess that against our skills and our resources.
Would you consider ownership?
Yes. We had certain clients that we got along with very well, and we had certain clients that we had I wouldn't say we were at odds with, but our relationship was not warm and fuzzy. So we were trying to build those relationships. We were trying to improve them, but the effort to improve them sometimes is a very long road. And as you make 2 or 3 strides in the right direction, one wrong step could remove 3 positive steps. It was very difficult. But yeah, we look at those, because if it was a pretty precarious opportunity and it was a very favorable client, we might go ahead and step up and say, let's go ahead and try and make this work. But if they were very unfavorable, we might say, yeah, we need to step away from this one, because it's already going to be tough enough, and then they're going to be that much harder on us, and risk is too high.
I guess I was kind of asking from a client perspective, but if you're the EPC and when you go out for bids on your third parties, do you
Mhm.
look at ownership? Because a lot of companies have started buying up their competition and really corner the market, and it creates an issue sometimes.
You're talking about ownership of the subs that we might use?
Right.
Yes. Well, what we really started doing is, as we identified what we would look at basically how they were operating. And so this is where word of mouth really comes in, because we had our experiences with different subs, but we had other GCs that also had experiences with different subs, and even though we were competitive, and y'all know this too, your competitors also could be some of your friends, and so you get together and you share a little bit. And as we started learning either directly or indirectly about certain subcontractors and their performances and quality and safety, then we just wouldn't go bid to them anymore until we heard by the experience of others that things were improving. That way we weren't the ones that they were trying to improve on. We didn't want to take that kind of risk. We had a couple of subs in particular that performed very poorly. It forced us into litigation with them, but it also put us in a tough spot with our client, one of our better clients. That created a little bit extra stress, and so we stopped using them altogether, and we went and searched for other subs to replace them. Where that gets difficult is that if the client you're dealing with doesn't still wants you to use them as one of your choices, they may not let you introduce a replacement, and so you become handcuffed. But ownership would be part of that as well.
Mr. Whitman, the way I learned it, there was a mindset of how to win the job.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. And I remember once we won the job, the first meeting, and I know it's going to sound bad, but the first meeting we would have after we won the job, we'd say, okay, guys, how are we really going to execute this job?
I wish I could say that was unusual, but that actually sounds pretty typical. because well, a lot of times as soon as we won a job, we would turn and look at each other and said, okay, what did we miss? If we were second and we won the job, usually felt pretty good about it. But if we were low bidder, we were scrambling to go try to figure out what we missed. And because why else would we be low? I mean, we were always trying to tighten the belt as much as we could. But if we were barely low, it also depends on who we were low against. But yeah, we had a similar perspective, because after that, it's like, okay, now, are we going to be able to use the same construction manager that helped us bid it? Because normally what we would do is, even though we were quote unquote estimating, I was striving to try and make sure that we developed some basic construction execution plan along with the proposal that we were submitting. And if construction was able to provide somebody to help with that, that's great, because we had somebody that had skin in the game. And if they didn't, we needed to develop it anyway. But then there are times where by the time they actually made the award, several months have gone by, not just weeks, and the construction manager that had been helping us was already on another job because they needed him to stay billable. And then we're right back to what you said. All right, we know you weren't here. This was our mindset at the time. How are we going to do it now for real? Any better ways? Because if we're low, that means we probably missed something. So we need to find some other way to do it less expensively to make up for where we now have a gap.
And once you get to the table, usually the client, it divulges more details that they weren't privy to do in the proposal stage, for, just to level the playing field. So once you get there and you find out more details, you got to revise your execution plan.
Well, no, I agree. And the catch there is that if the information they divulge is significant enough, now you have a basis for a change order.
Right.
And if you have a change order, you've got an opportunity to increase your margin, your project gross margin a little bit, and let off a little bit of the pressure. Because we all are our change orders, and I'd be curious if everybody else says yes, no, or not sure. But our change orders always had a little bit better profit margin than our initial bid, which I think is typical.
Yeah, because one technically is competitive and the other one is not.
Exactly.
I used to work for electrical contractors, an estimator for them, and whenever we had change orders, we always would use foreman labor costs rather than that apprentice.
That makes sense. There's an automatic, regardless of who was actually going to perform the work.
Right, because like when we were bidding it, we would factor out, okay, we need at least one journeyman on the job. How many apprentices can we get on the job? So with that, we would be able to adjust our wage and labor costs on the that way. But once we went into execution, if we could get by with just 2 people on the job site, we would, depending on what phase of the execution that we were in.
Yeah, and we tried, I know when we do it, we try to bring up those issues after we've executed a contract.
I know right now the crews that we used at Cajun were more simplistic crews, where we might have a crew of 5, and it's just 2 journeymen, 2 apprentice, and a foreman, and that's it. At Fluor, at Black and Veatch, at Brown and Root, we built much more complex, all-inclusive type crews, where the average wage rate that we're applying to our mechanical would include millwrights, iron workers for rigging, a crane operator, a pipe fitter, a couple of laborers, and the millwrights might have 1 apprentice and 1 journeyman. And so it's a real blend of, we might even have a little bit of truck time in there, depending upon where we had the handoff between indirect and direct craft. So it's interesting to hear you talk about that. In fact, we'll talk about crews and wage rates a little bit later in the semester. I'd be really curious to hear how you approached your journeyman to apprentice ratios and things of that nature. That could be an interesting conversation. So, but good point. Yeah, one way or the other, however we're all kind of doing the same thing. We're putting in, whether the fee was actually a higher markup or putting in more journeymen and removing the apprentices. The end goal was the same. And, that's an opportunity to make up for some of those early misses if you have that opportunity. But this is the general process that we would go through in our final bid, no bid decisions at Cajun, at least. And thanks, I thank Cajun for allowing me to use their template. And then we're going to kickoff meetings. So I don't how many people on the call right now. Well, I can't really do hands up, I guess, but I'm curious, is there anybody that really hasn't spent any time at kickoff meetings?
I have not personally.
Okay.
We don't call them kickoff meetings, we call them pre-bid meetings.
Yeah, we call them pre-bid, project kickoff. Yeah. And
depending on the complexity is whether we go through a walkthrough or not. There's a lot of, if there's a lot of conflicting areas and small areas and stuff, then they might give you a walkthrough.
yeah, when I think of my building construction days, I never did a field walk. We bid everything from the drawings and we talked to the client, and we didn't make that expenditure until it was time to go and start really finalizing plans. But from an industrial perspective, we unless it's a high level, all the FEL2, FEL3 type bid, well, FEL2 in particular, we did not. But as we started becoming more and more detailed, when it became an actual bid, we made a site walk pretty much every single time. Somebody, even if it was greenfield, and they were basically just walking out and looking at the open field, we wanted boots on the ground. But then that kind of drives a variation in the client meeting or the pre-bid meeting that I'm discussing, and that is some of the clients on the smaller jobs, they won't even give us the packages until we go to this pre-bid meeting. So basically, if you wanted to bid, even wanted the opportunity to bid, you had to show up, and they will hand you the packages and walk through them. Usually those were smaller jobs, small cap type jobs, 500,000 to a few $1 million. The larger projects that I've been associated with in the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, there was a little bit different scenario, because when we have say we have a $2 million small cap project, you're going to take a trip to the plant that you're doing the work in, and the client's going to go through the package at the plant. And so all the competitors are there together, and the client is taking the opportunity to walk through the package in some various level. And at this point, it's a good opportunity to identify who your competition is as you're trying to make the assessment of how you're going to move forward. It gives you an opportunity to ask questions of the client, and for the clients that issue that package early, which allows you time to go through it. Normally we would arrive with a whole load of questions. We start asking those questions, but the clients that don't do that, the clients that give you the package at the meeting, you're pretty much just trying to absorb the package as you go, and then asking questions that come to mind immediately. And then you have to basically go back, continue to study the package, and start sending in RFIs. On the other case, with the large jobs, the hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, at this point, your clients may be spread across the country. So in Houston, most of your major contractors are represented here. You have Bechtel here, Black and Beach here, Kiewit is here, Fluor is here. They, take a pick. Wood is here, so you have large contractors. Even Samsung and Mitsui and some of those companies, they're not so much into the construction itself, but they're interested in the engineering side, and they're all here. So there's been a lot of these larger jobs that when we were bidding as a team, and the JGC, they're working in they're a contractor as well. So they're represented. I'm pretty sure they have an office here in Houston as well. So in that case, your clients aren't necessarily spread everywhere, but there's been jobs that we've bid in Kuwait, Korea, other locations where, we're in Houston, we've got another competitor in California, but then a couple of competitors are actually Chinese, and one is Korean, and one is Greek. And so in that situation, they still will have a pre-bid meeting, but they'll fly a select group of 3 to 5 people to a neutral site, a neutral location where they'll take a full day or two to go through the package. And then everybody goes home and decide, kind of gives everybody a download of what they experienced and what they learned as everybody continues to go through the package. Because in a job like that, you're usually bidding engineering, procurement, and construction. So it's a much broader scope of work, and it's a little bit earlier in the development stage as opposed to what I was talking about at first, the Cajun and Turner and some of the Excel and some of the other similar companies. We're going to the plant and being introduced to the project, and it's $1 to $5 million, and it's a fairly complete project because we're now really bidding FEL4 information. So that's 2 different pre-bid scenarios that you would find in the industrial world, and the one right afterwards as we're finishing up the meeting for the smaller package, we'll walk right out of the building. You'll walk into the plant and they'll start walking you through the scope of work. Even though you just saw the package a few minutes ago, because they held it back until you showed up, you need to absorb it as quickly as possible and take as many notes as you can as you're walking through, and you're trying to identify, because you have a plot plan in the package they gave you, a mechanical equipment list. They'll give you all the piping isometrics, so you're kind of absorbing as you're walking through the plant, and you're looking for interferences, access, congestion, overhead, obstructions. Do you need chemical suits? Do you have there's one that we were working on where it was next to a furnace. It was about 12-foot diameter, 100 feet long furnace, and that the work involved the furnace partly, but involved a whole lot more. But that whole area of the plant was 10 to 20 degrees hotter than the surrounding part of the plant. And when you think about the heat that furnace is putting off, and the fact that you're in Houston in the middle of the summer and it's already 95 to 100, you have to start taking in special considerations of, okay, now we have to have cool down stations for all the craft, things of that nature. So that's the type of things we're looking for as we're walking the sites. Those larger jobs, like I mentioned, jumping back to the hundreds of millions plus, usually when they're that large, you're going and just clearing out a whole open area. You got an open field of some kind. And so it's not, even though we still like to have boots on the ground so that you can do an assessment of what's the soil like, what's the access to the site like, where are we going to put laydown yard, where's our office going to be, where we're going to have employees park, things of that nature. And it may vary. If the job that we bid in Kuwait, it wasn't where are the employees going to park, and what's the hotels like, we're like, where are we going to put the man camp? because we had to build a man camp for, about 1,000 people. And then we would basically just bus them down the road from the man camp to the job site. And then being in Kuwait, everything's basically sand. So, we're looking at, we already knew that we had to stabilize and drive piles and things of that nature. But we still wanted at least a couple people to make a basic pass at the site. Now, we came up with a site walk template that we started using. And I won't spend too much time on it, but we actually we're trying to compare this to the scopes as we're filling this out, and we're trying to absorb the scope as we're making the site walk. We're already trying to identify what are the craft that we're going to need, what are the subcontractors that we're going to need, what materials do you think we're going to have to purchase, and we're trying to build in our mind pretty quickly what we thought the field staff was going to need to be at this job site. Granted, we're back to what I'm discussing here is a give or take $2 million job. So you could assess a staff build as you're walking through. You maybe even make some initial judgments on a crane by looking at what you have to install, looking at where you'd have to set it in relation to the existing pipe racks or other equipment or buildings. And you could kind of frame where you thought you're going to go early with this type of document. And so it was very handy for us. $100 million job, $1 billion job, this, maybe the concept could be adapted, but it's so much larger and more involved that this particular template isn't quite feasible at that point. But as we're, on the large jobs, like I said, it's open field. You basically have a blank canvas as to what your execution plan is going to be, acknowledging certain limitations of our example. We were bidding on a job here recently in Mozambique. There's no, the city of Palma isn't going to handle foreigners and with hotels. So we're back to a man camp, and we're looking at probably 1,500 craft on site. It's right on the coast. It's on the eastern coast of Africa. So under those circumstances, even though it was a wide open field, blank canvas, we already had certain script written for us just by where the job was located and what was going to be needed. In Kuwait, it was very similar. It was out in the middle of the desert on the southern tip but there was much more infrastructure there, so we could bring in electric power. So part of our execution plan was scripted to us by the environment. The rest was pretty much an open book. Moved to these smaller projects, a couple $1 million. Now we're in an existing plant that none of them look quite as bad as this one. But nonetheless, you have a lot more parameters that are imposed on you that you're now having to deal with. And so, we're going to work through, as we're making our site walk, trying to develop game plans that we would try to refine and finalize. We got back to the office and we had the opportunity to digest the scope more thoroughly. And then after all that is when we'd finalize the bid, no bid. At that point in time, once we've had a chance to see the site, listen to the client, make some assessments, and then and take consideration all the other things we talked about: subs, relationships, competitiveness, the scope fit our strategy, and so forth. Any questions or thoughts so far? Anything that I haven't touched on that you would like to discuss? Anything that I've said that left you confused or wondering what I meant? All right, the sample contract. I mentioned earlier that we usually receive a sample contract in the bid package, and I want to reiterate the importance of redlining the contract and resubmitting it, because we normally had a number of things that we were looking for when that contract would arrive on our desk. And the primary thing is we're looking for excesses. What are they asking for that's in excess of what is reasonable And the key point is making sure we're letting them know that we have concerns or we have pushback or we have disagreement, whatever the right term would fit your situation, prior to signing or trying to sign a contract. There's been times I've seen where everybody held back and didn't start commenting on the contract until we were about to receive the award. And at that point, the client was irritated. Well, you didn't let us know there was a problem until now, and we're in the process of finalizing negotiations. That caused them to step back. In some cases, it actually caused, well, a couple of cases, it caused us to lose the award. In other cases, we still received the award, but it took an additional 2 to 3 weeks to work through the red lines. The problem with that is that the required mechanical completion date of the contract never moved. So now you have a 6-month job that now only has 5 months and 1 week left to execute. So it became a substantial pressure in the schedule aspect. So I think it's important to note that during the process of submitting the proposal, even though it's indirectly related to the estimate, it has a direct impact on the estimate, and the estimate should reflect the outcome of what this discussion is. The project manager or proposal manager, whoever's leading this effort, needs to take the time to read through the contract, redline it, and either submit it prior to submitting the proposal or with the proposal, one or the other. Make this as long as they have that early so that they can actually start responding to your concerns in a timely manner. So what are some of the concerns that I'm talking about? Requiring more insurance than you really think is necessary. In some cases, more insurance is better, but it's also more costly. And that extra cost may put you out of competition. The opposite of that is asking you to drop your insurance because it's an OSIP. An OSIP is a program where the client self-insures the project. And so the clients have rarely, and I've had this with the large multi-100 million plus jobs and the small $2 million, $5 million jobs, they'll claim it as an OSIP and want us to drop all of our insurance costs. That way they get the bid down from everybody. We refuse to completely align with that because even though they are self-insuring the project, and most of the incidents that would occur on the project would be covered by their insurances typically don't cover everything on the job site. And they almost always don't cover anything outside of the plant. So if you have craft leaving the plant to drive down the road to pick up materials at an off-site laydown yard, or you send someone out to go buy materials, a buyer of some kind, and there's an accident, that will not be covered by the OSIP. So there's both of those aspects are something that we're looking for in there. A big one is liquidated damages. Maybe you have no choice to sign up for liquidated damages, but can you negotiate a smaller value or different terms so it doesn't kick in on time? Maybe you can give yourself an extra couple of weeks before you start receiving or incurring liquidated damages. Or at the end of the day, you may decide it's the risk of liquidated damages is too high and you have to no bid. Some cases, what we do is we end up pricing in what liquidated damages we think we're likely to incur, and then we see where we land in the bidding process at that point. But we've mitigated that liability to some extent in our bid. Excessive indemnity. I've seen clients basically say, it doesn't matter what happens, you can't hold us harmful for anything. And even if they were at fault. And so we had to do a lot of pushing back and say, we're responsible for anything that we do, but that's it. You're responsible for anything other. So that can be a real sticky. Some of the clients like Air Liquide, Prax Air, a lot of the air type companies, they are very particular. They have some pretty extensive indemnity clauses in their contracts, and they gave us fits trying to work through them. I've seen warranties, bonds. I've seen, typical warranty that we see is a year, and I've seen contracts come through where they wanted 2.5 years warranty, bonding or guarantee. I mean, normally we're issuing bonds for 10% of the value, but some 100%, and so the bond fee becomes quite expensive. It may push a couple of people out of the ability to compete. And then unreasonable schedules and unreasonable pay schedules or schedule values. So, we've looked at it and said, this is a great job. The terms are great, but you want it built in half the time we think it's going to take. We don't know that we can sign up for that. They'll have a reason why they want it, but that doesn't mean that that's realistic. And then if you couple an unrealistic schedule with liquidated damages, now you have a real problem. Touching on these particular items and talking about the contract, I know is kind of tangential to, well, we're talking about putting an estimate together here, but the decisions behind how to handle each one of these items should directly impact the estimate you submit. If you've got liquidated damages, are you going to add money into your contingency bucket to mitigate some of that risk? Do you think, it's unlikely we're going to run past the MC date or the commissioning date or the startup date by more than 2 weeks, but we think we might overrun by a week or 10 days or something. So what's the probability? So you might put some money in to mitigate that. The unrealistic schedule, the pay schedule, if you can't get them to budge on any of that, you're going to have to increase your overtime pay because you're going to have to do more in less time, which means everybody's working more overtime and may even have to go a night schedule if you decide to take it on. Unfavorable pay schedule, you might need to work into your estimate cost of money, interest that you have to pay. So even though it's the general topics tangential, if it's handled properly, it will have a direct impact on your estimate. Any thoughts? Another key point: whenever you receive the package, before you start crunching numbers and putting the estimate together, I highly advise that either you or your company pull together an RFP checklist. Something where you're going through and you're checking the package and you're checking the documents, because particularly if you decide to bid, if it becomes a no bid, then everything stops. So this becomes a moot point. But if you're decide to bid, it's very important to make sure you have everything. I think David earlier made a statement that directly relates to this, and that is just you got to go through and check everything to make sure that it's complete. There's usually a master list of documents, and so once you find that master list, you need to check and make sure everything you've told that you've been given is actually there, because if that ends up being the reason why you left something out of the estimate, but you don't have any proof that you never received it, then the assumption is you did, and now you're liable instead of them. Scope of work, as simple as it is, I've received bid packages. It was just a bunch of information, and through an RFI process and trying to piece the details together, we had to kind of build a scope of work, and that was very frustrating and lost a lot of time. And then you're basically submitting a proposal that you're not 100% sure is what they want, because they can't really tell you what you want. Knowing important dates, submission time, submission method, expected date of award, expected notice to proceed. Those are important because unless you are submitting a proposal, and I think in building construction, you're more likely to have bids from your subs and from your vendors that are firm along with your number. So when you submit the number, it's good for a certain period of time. And in the industrial side, it's common for us to receive bids from vendors and subs and say, this number is good for 15 days, but we're not submitting the number for 30 or 45 days. So by the time we submit it, all of our data, all of our pricing that it's based on is expired already. And we know we're going to have to go buy it in the future, particularly since a lot of our jobs are EPC. We still have an engineering process to finish before we procure. So we're now looking, these dates here are important for us to determine our escalation values, because we're going to project an escalation increase of all of our pricing to some level. Client bid form, that's important. There's a lot of times that gets forgotten until the very end, and then everybody's scrambling to try to transpose their cost and their summary sheet into a client's bid form. Seems easy, but numbers get dropped. And in those cases, when it's forgotten or left to the very last. Instruction to bidders, I've seen $500 million jobs. I think David or Stephen, one of y'all mentioned earlier, bids costing $1 million. Yeah, I've seen bids that cost $1 million to assemble that were worth 500 million to $1 billion or more. And because they didn't follow the instructions of bidders, they got thrown out, weren't even considered.
Compressors from Italy that are 1.5.
Yeah, we had a $500 million job that we bid, and when our company, I won't name names, I'll protect the guilty, but I was on with a company, and our marketing group that packaged all of our submissions. The instructions required you to double seal it, and they sealed the exterior box that they sent it. But when the client opened up the exterior box to pull the interior box out to hand to the people that were going to make the decision, it was not sealed. And so we were thrown out. That's all. We were there on time. I saw another one. It was a $10 billion job, and the company submitted their package 3 minutes late, and they were refused. That had to really hurt, because that bid costs a lot of money put together. All right, well, we're actually a little bit over. There's a quiz next Thursday, 7:15 to 8 standard. It'll be a self-teaching day. I'll be here to answer questions. If I've been receiving emails, I apologize now. I know I don't email back quickly. What I found is that it arrives in my email, but I have to go to Canvas to respond. Every time I respond to you directly from my email, Canvas blocks me for whatever reason. And so I have to be in a position where I can access Canvas and email you from Canvas. So sorry about the delay on that, but I've been trying to get back to everybody. I think I've responded to everybody so far. If I haven't, send me another email, or and I'll try to respond and answer your questions.